everybody. Hi, welcome back. I know I've been distracted lately with these Boer War videos, haven't I? I've been on a little road trip while Brian went away in his caravan. He went up to New South Wales, to Forbes and Bathurst Orange. Of course I got him to take some Boer War monument video for me, so we'll have a special edition of that. But while he was gone, I like to get out myself and have a little day trip. And so that's why I ended up going to Ararat, Maryborough, Denali, Talbot. I hope you enjoyed those. They were a lot of fun. But back to my time in South Africa. It's been just over a week since we talked about that hitchhiking trip to Durban Brian and I took, and there I was laying in a fever and hallucinating and with the tick bite fever, feeling like I was on the brink of death. They dragged me back, and so we were back to school that year in 1974, living in Gladstone Avenue. This really was the end of the run with the Heralds and I. Now, you've heard me mention Electric Birth once or twice, and that was a band Brian Gould and I formed, with a difference. Now the lead up to that was that in 1974, as you heard from my brother, a few episodes ago, his band Void was taking off. They were big in Brakpan. You've got to remember, there were no bands touring or coming through. There used to be a joke that on a Saturday night, what did the Brakpanites do for entertainment? They get deck chairs and they sit on the corners and watch the robots change, the traffic lights. There was an element of truth to that. So there wasn't much to do, and certainly there wasn't much in the way of rock music, which was discouraged by the authorities to indulge in and enjoy ourselves. So when Void started playing around Brakpan, and I should have asked Aidan, I can't remember how they did it, but they would certainly be at the Catholic Church, the golf club. He mentioned the Park Hotel, but with the halls, I don't know whether they hired them themselves, that they might have had a girl at the front behind a desk that took your money, gave you a little ticket or a stamp. I don't know, and I doubt whether there was alcohol served there. All I do know is we were getting to see live rock music from guys with long hair. Fantastic. Now, because of that, I was bitten with the bug to be in a band. Now I've mentioned my brother used to bring home these brilliant LP records, and Dad had bought the swanky new for 1974 hi-fi system, which we were cranking up to 11. Aidan also had these. They were like a practice rubber kit. It had a rubber disc for your drum. It had a little felt on the top, and it was in a frame. It had a kick pedal as well for the bass drum, and he was going off on this thing, learning to play drums to, as I said in the other one, songs like Deep Purple Burn. But there were other albums like Wishbone Ash Argus, the Jethro Tull Aqualung was an album that I bought, or he bought secondhand for me. But the big ones for Brian and I, Status Quo, Pile Driver. Can you see that album cover there? That image of those guys, the three of them with the long hair laying down or leaning over, the denim, the guitars, the solidarity, I don't know, it did something in my head. I think it worked for Brian as well. The other Quo album, Hello, was a big one. Focus, Hocus Pocus, and the other big one that really sucked us in was Black Sabbath, Paranoid. Now I think I've got my original album that I bought in Brakpan, and I think I've even got the purchase card for it. Let's go and have a look. I'll be back in a second. Okay, I've done the incredible. I've actually found it. Not only did I find the first album I bought, but I found the purchase receipt from a shop called The Turning Disc, which was in Springs. I thought I got it in Brakpan. It's to Nicky Cart, Black Sabbath. Price R5.50 on the 4th of the 11th, 74. Now I have not looked at the state of this album. You'll notice it's got a different sleeve than the Paranoid, Black Sabbath Paranoid, which is usual. Perhaps for that image was too confronting for the South African record public. I don't know. What's the state of the record? I haven't seen it for 30 or 40 years. Did I play it? Is it all scratched up? Yeah, there's some scuffing. Side B's okay. No real damage there. Okay. So, this was a big one for Electric Birth, and in fact, on here is a song, Electric Funeral. Side 2, song 1 is Electric Funeral. Electric Funeral, Electric Birth. So what am I talking about? So Brian and I were that taken with seeing Void and the idea of being in a band. We both rushed off. I sent off for one of these learn guitar in 12 easy lesson sort of packages. It was a box. Came in the mail. It was more designed, it seemed, for learning country and western guitar. It talked about having these thumb picks. It was slow, it was laborious, but I did learn some guitar chords, I think, from those books. Brian started having lessons with a guitar teacher that his parents paid for, but that wasn't enough for us. We wanted it quicker, so we built our own band. And when I say built, we built a band. Now a lot of that stuff came from the top of the State Mines tip. Dad had bought me a bicycle, just a standard blue bike, little bell, nothing fancy, with my usual airheaded disregard for looking after my belongings. I left it outside the newsagents, came out and it was gone. So I had to go and tell Dad, I lost my brand new bike, can I have another one? This time I thought about it a bit better. He got me a way cool chopper, this red chopper with the the Easy Rider sort of handlebars, banana seat at the back, smaller wheel at the front, big chunky tyre at the back, a gear shift in the middle. It was rocking. So I was riding out to State Mines a lot with that bike. Sometimes the heralds would be pedalling, and at the back of the banana seat was a little ledge, and I'd sit up there, prop up behind them, and they'd pedal to buggery. They were good bike riders. I was a bit slack. So Brian and I started bringing all this stuff back from the tip. Now this is where Pete, the Afrikaner, their mate with the green Mercedes, came in. Whether he helped to bring the stuff back to Gladstone Avenue, whether Dad did. So let's take it from the ground up with what we had. For amps, we found old suitcases, and we took the hinges off and we covered the front of the suitcase with black fine mesh to make it look like an amp. Mic stands. We found poles at the tip, and Pitt had a welding machine. He welded the frames to hold the, or we put weights, we rested them in weights so they stood upright. Now the guitars were the big thing. I had seen this red Maltese cross guitar that a guy called Ian Hunter played. I think Ian Hunter was with Mott the Hoople, don't quote me. But he had a guitar in the shape of a Maltese cross, and that's what I wanted. Now Dad, of course, was useless with tools. He was good with bags in the bakery and making wedding cakes and moulding things with marzipan, but useless with wood tools. So I remember there was a fella from the church, we went round to his place, and he drew out the shape of this Maltese cross with the wood. It was tricky. I remember him saying, this is going to be real tricky, they're going to want to break. But he had one of those saws that was going like that, and he was feeding the wood through till he got me this Maltese cross shaped guitar. I don't know whether he painted it for me, I don't know what the neck was, but then we had to decorate it. So for the volume controls we used little toothpaste, what are they called? The knobs on toothpaste. They were our controls. The strings were pretty easy. They were going to be fishing gut, of course. we had the leads coming from our guitars into our suitcase amps. Now the drums, so we got all types of paint tins from the tip. One of them was a big barrel, and Pitt, I think it was, painted our logo, electric Birth, on the bass drum. And then all the other side drums were going to be your, your snare, your hi-hat, your toms, and painted them white, and they were all painted, and they were attached to a frame. Once again, I think it was Pitt did the most of the welding. So he came through with that. So we were set to go. So we started rehearsing in that room, which is the lounge room. So when you're looking at the picture, I've got to try and figure it out. I think it's on your right. But the room away from the garage was where we rehearsed with, because that's where the stereo was. Another album I remember was Status Quo, Mars' Greasy Spoon. That was another big one. We played a lot of songs from that. So essentially what we'd do, we'd get in there and we'd start miming to these records. And always we were wanting to get into that pose like they were doing on Pile Driver. At any opportunity, Brian and I would be making the pose. Now initially Arnie played bass. We built him, or he built a bass. Brian's guitar, I think, was kind of like a black and white Stratocaster, if I remember. I wish I could ask him, but eventually he'll come on and he'll tell us some stuff. And then we needed a drummer. So initially it was Gary Herold was the drummer. What became evident and what became difficult was to stop the drummer from actually hitting the drums or hitting the tins with the sticks. It was almost impossible to get them to stop. While we were miming, if they started banging on paint tins, it ruined the whole effect. So incredibly difficult to ask the drummer not to actually hit. So the Heralds got bored pretty quickly, and from then on it started falling apart as far as they were concerned. They weren't into it. We tried, I mentioned Aggie, Aggie's younger brother Richard. We tried him. He came in for a while to try either the bass or the drums. We tried a fellow called Moffat. I think he got bored with it as well. Basically it was Brian and I that had the drive. Now we weren't refined to the lounge room, and in fact as we started rehearsing and rocking out, and it was full blast with Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, all that, some of the girls started sitting or watching us from the street. We'd pull the blinds back, the curtains back, and have a full band performance, and there were spectators starting to form in Gladstone Avenue. Now, Aidan's band got a gig at the Catholic Church, and I must have asked Aidan or Terry or someone, can we play? And they allowed us. I think Dad drove us there. We set up our material, we set up all our band stuff, and then behind we had like a table, I think, with like a little curtain behind it, and someone was working the records for us. Now we were rocking out, having a lot of fun, and this girl came up and said something along the lines of, "We know you're only miming, we know that, right?" Which was hilarious because it was so obvious. That was on the last live gig. The last live gig Electric Birth did was at a fella called, his name was Jim Tsitsikronis. He was a Greek. He had a sister called Helen. So he had a birthday party, and once again Dad took us to the to the party. We set up under a tent in the backyard. We started playing. Halfway through, I don't know what came over us, we were just tired of it. We did a bit of a Who, a bit of a Keith Moon. We started kicking the drums over, smashing the guitars, and we walked away. Now that sister Helen was a bit keen on me, because I remember that night she was singing "Nikki, don't be a hero, come back and make me your wife," that song, because she was a bit keen on me. Now, we just all went our separate ways from that party, and then I remember a week or two later, Jim at school was saying, Dad wants to know what you're doing with all that junk you left at our place, or he's going to take it to the tip from where it came, and we never got round to going and collecting or anything. So there was one final image I want you to have, which was the end of Electric Birth. Was some months later, at the tip, wandering around. Just before I tell you that, the straps on the guitars, we needed straps from seat belts on cars, okay? Straps, seat belts on cars. So the final image of the band, we go back to the tip. It's been 6 months or more since the last gig we played, and there, resting on its side on top of a pile of junk, was the bass drum with Electric Birth on it, with our emblem. And you know, the fact that it was sitting on top of all the junk that had been collected in 6 months. And that was the end of our brief foray into rock music, Brian and I, the kids that played without any real instruments or electricity, apart from the record player. So I hope you enjoyed that. Now, I mentioned the Heralds were drifting away. There was a big scene with Brian. Brian wrote this amusing joke about Pitt, or a limerick or something like that. Maybe there was a sketch with it. Basically, the Heralds were always now driving around with Pitt in the green Mercedes. They came round to my place once and they wanted to borrow some money. I gave it to them. It was only about £5 but they never gave it back. And then this joke, or this limerick, surfaced. He'd written it down. That was his mistake. Brian wrote it down. And they went and gave it to Pitt to show him what Brian had written about Pitt. So Pitt pulled up in the lime green Mercedes to Brian's house, and the Heralds were sitting in the car tittering and giggling. And Brian, you know, Brian was what, about 15? And this was a fully grown man, walked up and slogged Brian in the face when Brian opened the door. So so that was enough for us to say, look, they've moved away, and they were speaking predominantly Afrikaans then. So I don't know what happened, but that was the end of them. But we were to have another friend come into our circle, Brian and I. We were to form the Three Amigos. It was about halfway through that year that a new kid came to school that I would invite into our social circle, and he would become the third amigo between Brian and myself. So we'll leave that as a tantalising hint. That will be the next episode. We'll talk about our new friend and the direction he led us in, or led me in, and the things I was now getting into, which were a little bit more unsavoury than making wooden guitars and flying kites and walking on stilts and riding bikes around. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it didn't drag on too long. See you soon. Bye.